Normally, in Africa, parents are usually against their daughters doing things that are vanity, such as BBL. But in this story, it was different because a mother intentionally forced her own daughter to do BBL, and unfortunately for them, it turned out bad and they regretted it for the rest of their lives. You see, this happened in a small African town where there was a girl named Rebecca. She was very beautiful, but she wasn't the most beautiful girl in the village. The women in the town were all known for their beauty, and Rebecca was one of them. But her mother didn't think her beauty was enough. Rebecca's mother had big plans. She wanted Rebecca to marry Madu, the son of the richest man in the village. Rebecca, if you marry Madu, our family will never be poor again, her mother would say. Rebecca didn't understand why her mother pushed so hard. She liked other men in the village, but her mother always chased them away. Rebecca did everything her mother asked her to do. Every time Madu passed by, her mother would say, "Rebecca, go. Make sure he sees you." Rebecca would walk past him, smiling and looking her best, but Madu would just nod politely and walk away. He didn't even stop to look at her for long. It made Rebecca feel sad. Rebecca would cry to her mother, "Madu doesn't care about me, Mama. I should marry someone who loves me." But her mother didn't give up. "Keep trying, Rebecca. He's the richest man's son. He's the only one who can take us out of this poor life. You must marry him." Rebecca didn't understand why her mother only wanted Madu. There were many other men in the village, kind and hardworking men who liked Rebecca. They would come to the house, bringing gifts and asking to marry her. Rebecca liked them too, but every time her mother would send them away. "These men are not good enough," her mother would say. "They have nothing. Only Madu can give us a good life." Rebecca felt tired and frustrated. She wanted to marry someone who loved her, someone who cared about her. But her mother's words always echoed in her ears. It's Madu or nobody. Rebecca didn't know what else to do. She felt trapped, always trying to win the heart of someone who didn't care, while pushing away the love of the men who did. And so Rebecca kept on trying, hoping that one day Madu would notice her. One day, a woman named Alice, Rebecca's mother's old friend, came from the big city to visit. Alice had heard about all the troubles Rebecca's mother was having, trying to get Madu to notice Rebecca. After listening to all the stories, Alice shook her head and said, "You've tried everything, but maybe Rebecca needs something different." Rebecca's mother was curious. "What do you mean?" she asked. Alice smiled and leaned closer. "In the city, there's something called BBL. It can make a woman's body more attractive. Maybe if Rebecca had a curvier body, Madu would notice her." Rebecca's eyes grew wide. "No, Mama, I don't want that. I'm fine the way I am," she cried. Her mother was unsure too. "But that's expensive, and I don't want to change Rebecca's body just for marriage." Alice shrugged. "It might cost money, but if Rebecca marries Madu, you'll get all the money back. Besides, all the girls in your town look the same. If Rebecca does this, she'll stand out. Madu will finally see her." Rebecca didn't like the idea at all. "Mama, please, let me marry one of the men who already love me. I don't need Madu," she begged. But Rebecca's mother was stubborn. "Rebecca, don't be silly. You don't want to end up poor like me. I got married to your wretched father just because of love. Look at me now. I'm poor and my friends are rich, just because of one wrong decision I made. Rebecca, this is our chance. Madu is the only one who can change our lives." Though Rebecca didn't want the surgery, Her mother's mind was already starting to turn, thinking about how this might finally make Madu notice her daughter. Alice's words stayed with her, and so the idea of the BBL began to take root. Even though Rebecca wished for a different path, Rebecca's mother grew more desperate as days passed. She knew Rebecca would never agree to the BBL, and she didn't want to lose the chance for her daughter to marry Madu. So, one evening, she quietly made her way to a herbalist who lived at the edge of the village. When she arrived, she told the herbalist, "I need something to make my daughter listen to me. She refuses to follow my plans and time is running out." The herbalist thought for a while, then said, "I can give you a charm, but it will only work for 21 days. After that, your daughter will come back to her senses and anything can happen. You must be careful." Rebecca's mother didn't care about the warning. "That's enough time," she said. "I just need her to obey me for now." The herbalist handed her a small bottle filled with a dark liquid and whispered instructions on how to use it. "Place this under her pillow at night. When she wakes up, she will do whatever you say." That night, while Rebecca was asleep, her mother carefully slipped the charm under Rebecca's pillow. She whispered softly, "You will listen to me, Rebecca. You will obey." The next morning, Rebecca woke up, not knowing anything had changed. But when her mother told her to pack her things and go with Alice to the city for the BBL, Rebecca, without question, obeyed. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just packed her bags and left. Alice, seeing how easily Rebecca agreed, smiled to herself. "It's working," she thought. And so Rebecca and Alice left the village, heading to the city where the surgery would take place. Rebecca's mother watched them go, hoping her plan would work, not knowing the troubles that lay ahead. Rebecca went to the city with Alice, and the surgery was done. She didn't feel anything at first, but when she looked in the mirror after the healing, she was shocked. Her body was now curvier, with a fuller figure. She looked like a completely different person. When Rebecca returned to the village, everyone stopped and stared. The people whispered, "Is that Rebecca? She's so different, so beautiful." Her new body caught the attention of the whole town, especially Madu. Rebecca was confused. She didn't remember agreeing to the surgery, but she saw how people looked at her now, especially Madu. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Rebecca, you look amazing," he said. For the first time, Madu noticed her, and he fell in love with her instantly. Rebecca's mother smiled proudly. "See, I told you this would work," she whispered to Rebecca. It was now 21 days after the charm, and the spell casted on Rebecca has faded. Her mother, knowing this, didn't know what to expect next. But surprisingly, Rebecca didn't ask many questions. She was happy with the attention and believed it was all worth it. She thanked her mother. "Mama, I didn't know I could be this important. Everyone wants to see me now. Thank you." Not long after, Madu asked Rebecca to marry him, and Rebecca happily agreed. The whole town talked about the wedding, and Rebecca's mother was overjoyed. She felt like all her dreams had come true. Madu's family gave them a big house and lots of money, just as Rebecca's mother had always wanted. Everything seemed perfect. Rebecca had become the wife of the richest man's son, and her mother's plan had worked. But no one knew the trouble that was coming. After Rebecca and Madu got married, everything changed for Rebecca's family. Madu's family gave them a big house, much bigger than they had ever lived in before. There was plenty of food, beautiful clothes, and more money than they could ever imagine. Rebecca's mother was the happiest of all. Finally, she said, "We are no longer poor. I always knew this would happen." She walked around the village with her head held high, proud that her daughter was married into the richest family in town. Everyone looked at her with respect and she loved it. Rebecca, too, enjoyed her new life. She had servants to help her, fancy clothes to wear, and delicious food every day. Everywhere she went, people would whisper, "That's Rebecca, the wife of the richest man's son." It made her feel important. Alice, the friend who had suggested the BBL, returned from the city to celebrate with them. Rebecca's mother gave her a big share of the money, just like they had promised. Alice smiled and said, "See, I told you this would work. Now, look at all you have." For 6 months, everything seemed perfect. Rebecca's family didn't have to worry about anything anymore. Rebecca's mother had finally achieved her dream of becoming the in-law of the richest family in town. And Rebecca, now admired by everyone, enjoyed the attention and luxury that came with her new life. But as the days went on, the happiness began to fade, and the real trouble started to creep in. The BBL surgery Rebecca had done has its side effects, but neither Rebecca nor her mother know. One quiet afternoon, while Rebecca was getting dressed, she noticed something strange. Her skin, which had once looked smooth and perfect, had started to peel. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe it's just from the weather, she told herself. She rubbed some cream on her skin, hoping it would go away soon. But as the days passed, the peeling and swelling didn't stop. It only got worse. One day, while sitting in front of her mirror, Rebecca felt an itch on her back. As she scratched it, she was horrified to find small maggots crawling from her buttocks. She gasped and jumped back from the mirror, fear gripping her heart. "What is happening to me?" she whispered to herself. She quickly covered the maggots with her dress, hoping no one would notice. From that moment on, Rebecca was filled with worry. Her skin kept peeling and swollen, and the maggots didn't stop. Then, one morning, she noticed her face in the mirror. It had started to shrink, making her look older than her years. The face that once made everyone in the village admire her beauty was changing into something unrecognizable. Rebecca was terrified. She couldn't let anyone see what was happening. She started wearing big scarves and long dresses to cover her body. She avoided people as much as she could, hoping no one would notice the changes. Every day, she prayed that the strange things happening to her would stop. But instead, it only got worse. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Rebecca ran to her mother. Tears streamed down her face as she pulled aside her dress and showed her mother the maggots. "Mama, look! What's happening to me? My body is falling apart." Her mother's eyes widened in horror. She had never seen anything like it. "Rebecca, we must keep this a secret," her mother said, her voice trembling. "If anyone finds out, it will bring shame to our family. We will lose everything." "But Mama, I'm scared," Rebecca cried. "What if it doesn't stop?" Rebecca's mother paced around the room, trying to think. "We can't let anyone know. You must continue to cover yourself, stay out of sight, and pretend everything is fine. I will find a solution. Just don't tell anyone, not even Madhu." Rebecca nodded, though her heart was heavy with fear. She trusted her mother, but deep down, she knew something terrible was happening to her. Day by day, her body was falling apart, and she didn't know how long she could hide it. While her mother tried to calm her inside, she was just as scared. She had pushed Rebecca into this, and now she didn't know how to fix it. The secret weighed heavily on both of them as the days passed and Rebecca's condition continued to get worse. Rebecca's mother, filled with panic, knew she had to do something fast. She grabbed her phone and dialed Alice's number, hoping her friend would have a solution. Alice, you have to help us, she whispered into the phone as it rang and rang. But there was no answer. She tried again and again, but Alice never picked up. It was as if she had disappeared, leaving Rebecca and her mother to deal with the growing nightmare alone. Frustrated and scared, Rebecca's mother turned to the only other person she thought could help, the herbalist. Early one morning, she took Rebecca, covered in long clothes and scarves, back to the edge of the village where the herbalist lived. They hurried into the small hut, hoping for some kind of cure. The herbalist, seeing Rebecca's condition, shook his head slowly. "This is not something I can easily fix," he said. "The charm I gave you was only meant to make her obey, not to change her body. You have meddled with something far more dangerous." Rebecca's mother begged, "Please, there must be something you can do. My daughter's body is falling apart. We are losing everything." The herbalist mixed herbs, gave them potions, and even performed rituals. But nothing worked. Days passed, and Rebecca's condition only got worse. The peeling and swollen skin was spreading. Her buttocks were now covered with maggots, and her face looked more sunken each time she saw her reflection. Rebecca was losing hope. "Mama, why is this happening to me? Why can't it stop?" she sobbed one evening, sitting in the corner of her room, hiding her face. Her mother, filled with regret but too afraid to admit her fault, simply held her daughter. "We will find a way, Rebecca. I promise." But even she didn't believe her own words anymore. As the days went by, Rebecca tried her best to stay hidden from the villagers, but the change in her face was becoming too obvious. She couldn't hide forever. People began to whisper, "Have you seen Rebecca? She doesn't look the same." Others noticed her walking differently, slower, almost in pain. One by one, people in the village started to talk. "Something is wrong with her," they said. "She's not as beautiful as she was before." The secret Rebecca and her mother had worked so hard to hide was slowly slipping out. Rebecca's worst fear was coming true. The beauty that had once brought her attention and love was fading, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Rebecca's condition had worsened to the point that she could no longer hide it. The scarves and long dresses she wore weren't enough to cover her sunken face, the peeling and swollen skin, and the slow, painful way she moved. One evening, while Rebecca was getting ready for bed, Madhu walked into the room and saw something he couldn't ignore. As Rebecca bent over to adjust her dress, Madhu caught sight of the maggots crawling from her buttocks. His face twisted in horror. "Rebecca, what is this?" he shouted, stepping back in disgust. Rebecca froze. She had tried so hard to keep the secret, but now Madhu had seen the truth. She couldn't hold it in anymore. "Madhu, I can explain," she stammered, but Madhu was already shaking his head. "What have you done to yourself?" he demanded. "How could this happen?" Rebecca's heart sank. She knew there was no point in lying anymore. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "It wasn't me. It was my mother." Confused and angry, Madhu pressed her further. Rebecca broke down, telling him everything. She explained how her mother had always wanted her to marry him, how she had rejected all the other men in the village, and how her mother had used a charm to force her into undergoing the BBL surgery. "I didn't want it, Madhu," she sobbed, "but my mother made me. She said it was the only way you would notice me." Madhu was furious. "So, you did all of this just to marry me?" His voice was filled with disbelief and disgust. Rebecca nodded, too ashamed to look him in the eye. Yes, I didn't want it to be like this. Madu's anger turned to rage. I married you because I thought you were real, but now I see it was all a lie. You've ruined everything. The next morning, the news spread through the village like wildfire. People whispered and pointed as Rebecca walked by. Her once beautiful face now twisted with age and pain. The villagers were shocked when they heard her story. They couldn't believe that her mother had forced her into such a terrible thing. They said she was so beautiful, they said. How could this happen? Why would anyone go so far for marriage? Rebecca's confession spread quickly, and soon the whole town knew. Her mother's plan, the surgery, the charm, everything was out in the open. The people who had once admired Rebecca for her beauty now pitied her, and some even mocked her for what had become of her. Madu, furious and unable to stand the sight of Rebecca anymore, packed his things and left the house. I can't live with someone who has deceived me like this, he said. The marriage was over, and Rebecca was left alone, her beauty gone and her reputation in ruins. The villagers, shocked by the lengths Rebecca's mother had gone to secure the marriage, could only shake their heads. Rebecca's life had been destroyed by vanity and her mother's desire for wealth and status. What was once a dream had now turned into a nightmare. After the truth came out, Madu wasted no time. He filed for divorce, and the rich family quickly cut all ties with Rebecca. They wanted nothing to do with her or the shame that now surrounded her. For them, the marriage had been based on deceit, and there was no way to fix it. Rebecca, once admired for her beauty, had become a shadow of her former self. Her body, once praised and envied, was now disfigured. Her skin, still peeling and swollen, and her sunken face made her almost unrecognizable. The maggots, which had horrified Madu, were still there, and no one could figure out how to stop them. Rebecca tried to hide, but it didn't matter. Everyone in the village knew what had happened. People who used to greet Rebecca with smiles and kind words now whispered behind her back. Look at her, they said. All that beauty, gone. She and her mother have brought this on themselves. The once adoring villagers now mocked Rebecca and her mother for their vanity. They couldn't understand why anyone would go to such lengths just to marry a rich man. Rebecca felt the isolation every day. She no longer had friends. No one came to visit her, and she stopped leaving the house altogether. Every time she tried to go outside, she could feel the eyes of the villagers on her, staring and whispering. The attention that once made her feel special now made her feel like an outcast. Her mother, who had pushed her into this life, now felt the heavy weight of guilt. She could no longer look at Rebecca without feeling the deep shame of what she had done. I ruined my daughter's life, she whispered to herself. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and every time she saw Rebecca's disfigured body, the regret grew stronger. Rebecca's father, who had been left in the background during all of this, couldn't believe how far his wife had gone, just for wealth. Look at what you've done, he said to Rebecca's mother, but she had no words to defend herself. She knew he was right. With no friends, no beauty, and no hope for the future, Rebecca's life became one of isolation. She spent her days hiding in the house, trying to avoid the cruel stares and whispers of the village. Even her mother, the one person she once trusted, couldn't bear to be around her for too long. The guilt of her decisions too much to handle. Rebecca's once bright future was now gone, replaced by the darkness of regret, shame, and loneliness. All the wealth and status they had gained from the marriage were worthless now. The big house felt empty, and the money meant nothing. Rebecca was trapped in a life she never wanted, with no way out. The villagers' mockery grew louder as the days passed, and Rebecca and her mother were left with nothing but the painful consequences of their vanity. Unable to bear the shame and constant whispers of the villagers, Rebecca and her mother decided to leave. They quietly packed their things and abandoned the big house and all the money they had gained from Rebecca's marriage to Madu. The once proud home now stood empty, a reminder of what had been lost. Rebecca and her mother moved far away, living the rest of their days in regret and isolation. Rebecca's body continued to deteriorate, and her mother's guilt only grew heavier with each passing day. They had traded everything, Rebecca's happiness, health, and future, for chance at wealth and status, and it had destroyed them. Meanwhile, back in the village, Rebecca's father, who had been left behind in the midst of everything, was surprised to find that he now owned the house and all the money Rebecca's marriage had brought. With Rebecca and her mother gone, the wealth was left in his hands. He, the once poor and forgotten man, had unexpectedly become wealthy, though he had paid no price for it. The irony wasn't lost on him as he sat in the house his wife and daughter had fought so hard to gain, realizing how their obsession with vanity had cost them everything. As time went on, Rebecca often sat in silence, reflecting on her choices. She realized how her mother's obsession with beauty and status had led her down a path of destruction. If only I had known, Rebecca would whisper to herself. She understood too late that true beauty comes from within, not from how you look on the outside. Rebecca's story became a warning to the town. People spoke of her as a reminder of the dangers of vanity and false beauty. The village never forgot the tale of the girl who lost everything, chasing after a life that wasn't meant for her. Moral of the story: vanity can lead to destruction, and chasing outward beauty at the expense of inner value can ruin your life. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. Thank you.